Hello. My name is Will, and I am a senior motion design artist at a company called MPC, and I'm based in London. Wow. MPC, what do we do? Well, a good hint is that we used to be called the Moving Picture Company. We changed our name recently just to MPC because we think initials are cooler. We're based all over the world. We've got offices in 8 countries, including Bangalore in India. We just added an office in Shanghai in China, over in North America, Mexico City, Los Angeles, Vancouver, New York, Montreal, over in Europe, London, where I work, Amsterdam, which is a recently added office, and Paris, which just got added. If you don't know us by name, you probably know us by some of our recent work. We were one of the principal VFX studios on the film Guardians of the Galaxy. We were the principal VFX studio on Ridley Scott's Prometheus. We've had a long-running relationship with Ridley. And we were one of the studios that won a VFX Oscar for Life of Pi. Currently, we've got a few new films in the pipeline. We're doing a new version of The Jungle Book, which is 90% CGI. And we're also, I believe, working on the next Terminator film. We're also really involved in commercials. We're well known at making creatures do things that nature never intended, like ponies that moonwalk, cats that sing, and babies that rock out on roller skates. We're well aware that the world of TV commercials is changing quite rapidly, and we're trying to branch into new ways of developing content and sharing content. One of the most exciting of which is this project that just came out of New York. This is what I understand to be the very first virtual reality horror film, and it's called Catatonic. We watched this in the studio the other day. I don't know if you've ever watched someone watch a virtual reality film experience. It's almost as fun as watching it yourself. We had guys in the studio sitting in chairs watching this thing, just sort of going, ah, 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 as they were constantly being attacked by these people in the mental hospital. I've watched it myself, and it is really scary. Slightly less scary, I hope. This is my team, or our team. This is the motion design studio in London. You may notice some of these people have been very badly and hastily photoshopped in. That's because this was a card for the leaving of our creative director, who is transferred to our new Mexico City office. And we very hastily put this together. His name is Dave Haupt. And he was responsible for really building our studio up from something around 6 people 3 or 4 years ago to the 25 and occasionally 45 that we are now. We're a little bit different from the rest of MPC. If you went into our film or commercials departments, you would find that the artists are quite specialized. So, for instance, in film, you might find a groom TD whose specialization is to make really good-looking fur or hair. In commercials, you might find a compositor who specializes in constructing beautiful photorealistic images. In motion design, we're kind of mongrels. We work across all the different aspects. So everyone you see in this picture here, pretty much, is an artist, designer, animator, director. They could pick up a project at any point, from a creative brief right down to the last finishing stages, and they can jump on it. We all have different levels of experience, but we all work across all parts of our jobs. We're a really serious bunch, but we do like to get out now and then and have a good time. If you're ever in London, please do come and visit us. Just remember to bring the essentials. I'm going to show you our reel now. This is the MPC Motion Design studio reel from London. So in case you're wondering why you don't see ships exploding and people look like they're made out of trees, that's why.
shot. Fired and loud, another round of shots. Fired and loud, another round of shots. Fired and loud, another round of shots. Shot, 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 shot. Turn down for what? Turn down for what? Turn down for what? Turn down for what? Turn down for what?
That's it. Oh, thank you. By the way, I think some of my colleagues in the studio are watching, so thanks, guys. The applause is for you, too. I'm going to talk at length about a couple projects, well, more than a couple projects now, and talk a bit about how we did them, how we got the jobs, how we faced some of the technical challenges, and the software we used, and that kind of thing. So the first one I'm going to talk about is this television commercial. It's a 45-second TV commercial we made for Martell Cognac. This is a brand new project. It's literally gone on TV very recently. There are a few unusual things about it. The first is I directed it, which is a new thing for me. Interesting. Also, it was made for a client in Lagos, Nigeria. So this ad is only going to be shown on television in Nigeria, where apparently they have a burgeoning cognac market. And the final thing is that we made nearly every shot using a piece of software called RealFlow. If you're not familiar with RealFlow, it's an application, a standalone application for now, that does physical world simulations, and it's essentially good at doing fluid simulations. I say standalone. I gather that in the next year or so, there will be a version of it that actually runs inside Cinema 4D, which we're really excited about. Enough talking about it. Here's the ad.
We start with a shot of tradition, an ounce of passion. Then we add a splash of curiosity and a dash of refinement. Squeeze in a few drops of humor and then shake it up with some generosity. Serve in good company with a slice of the unforgettable. Drink it slowly. Martell, full of character.
So that's the ad. Thank you. Thanks. When we initially spoke to the client about doing this ad, they said they wanted to use fluid simulations to build up all this text, and they wanted every letter to be animated using a fluid simulation. And they wanted to do it in a couple of weeks. And we said, that's not going to work. And so we suggested instead that we use stock footage. So we said, we'll either shoot or purchase a bunch of footage of cognac or whiskey, pouring in, and then we'll comp all that together in After Effects to make it look like it's realistically filling up letters and all that sort of thing. So I sat down to start doing that, and I realized pretty quickly that that was going to be a painful task. It was probably not going to take any less time than doing fluid simulations, and it was probably going to look pretty bad. So I was getting a bit worried about this, and I thought, I'm just going to see how long it takes me to get something interesting out of RealFlow. So very quickly, I just exported some text objects from C4D and popped them into RealFlow and ran this simulation. So this is just liquid filling up inside a letter that you can't see. And this is okay. It took about a minute to simulate this. But obviously, when you saw this rendered, it would look pretty gloopy, and it wouldn't be very interesting as fluid. So we ran some more tests. And this is kind of the essence of RealFlow, is this control called resolution with this particular type of fluid simulation. And basically what resolution does is just give you loads more particles, those little dots filling up there. So you can see on the number 1, which is the one I started with, it's pretty gloopy. But by the time you get to 20, you actually get something that looks pretty nice, especially when it's splashing around. And you can go up and up with this as high as you want. Obviously, it is a trade-off there. The more resolution you use, the more computing power you require. But I realized pretty quickly that we could actually build a font out of these animated characters. If we just picked every letter that we would need in our commercial, obviously there were some that we didn't need, we could animate every single one of them, and we never have to worry about doing them again. We could just build up text from them. Now, I've done this before with other types of font building. I've built 3D fonts before. One of the problems you come up against is that the letters, if you use the same letter twice in a row or twice in the same frame, it immediately becomes obvious that they look exactly the same, and that whole kind of illusion of them being live and filled with fluid kind of disappears. But we just discovered that it was simply a matter of offsetting the time, and you get something that actually looks kind of unique. So in this case, these two S's are actually the same simulation, just run with a different time offset. Now, some of the shots wouldn't work as part of this font. They had to be done specially, and this is one of them. This is probably my favorite shot in the ad, mainly because it's the one where we got to really push the resolution as high as we wanted to. I would have loved to have done this throughout the ad, but we just didn't have time. So in this case, we took the resolution up to 150, and we really get something nice there. If I show you how that looks rendered, you get all kinds of lovely detail, and neat streaks, and that sort of thing. The thing about resolution is, what you'd really like to be able to do is run a simulation at low resolution, make sure everything's going where it's supposed to, and then run it again at a higher resolution, maybe leave it running overnight. We did this a few times, and we discovered that overnight, the simulation had kind of exploded because the number of particles was so much higher. And it was kind of like if you left the tap on in the bathroom and you went in the morning and you found the floor flooded with fluid. Some of the fluid had exploded outside the letter containers, and so you opened this scene that had particles everywhere. The poor computer was probably dying. So a little tip there, if you're going to try to upscale your scene, that you've got to pay attention to what happens when you have a higher resolution. I said we were quite nervous about using RealFlow. That wasn't because we didn't have faith in it. It was just because of the time we had and the challenges that we knew we would face. One piece of software that comes with RealFlow kind of made this much easier and much more doable. And this is called the RealFlow Render Kit. And it's an additional plugin that comes with RealFlow. You install it in C4D. I believe it used to be something that you pay for, but now is free. And it's incredibly useful. To understand why, I'll show you how we used it. So this is an animatic of one of our shots, the word tradition filling up. And we had exported all the letters to do this scene using a file format from C4D called SD. That's the format that RealFlow can read. So each of these letters went into RealFlow as a separate object and was simulated inside RealFlow, like this. And each one of those is a separate simulation. And those little dots that are flying around in there, if you haven't done simulations like this before, those are particles. And they are the base of the fluid simulation. You can see there are lots of different colors. And the particles store all kinds of information inside them. They're not just dumb little dots. They actually contain information about speed and pressure, direction they're traveling, all that kind of thing. And those files, those particle sequences, are stored by RealFlow into sequences called bin files. And they're great. The only problem is they don't render as fluid. So when you look at something like this, you can't just hit render and it becomes fluid. For that, you need something called a mesh. And a mesh is a sort of geometric approximation of the way the fluid works. Meshing is a tricky process. It's hard to get right. It's hard to control. But when you do get it right, it looks good. But it also creates very, very large files. I think some of the files we were getting were kind of hundreds of megabytes per frame. And that makes it really difficult to use inside C4D because you want to manipulate several different meshes at once. So for instance, if we brought in all those letters in tradition as meshes, we simply wouldn't be able to run our scene. Everything would slow down to a halt. We wouldn't be able to scrub through our timeline, look at offsetting things, change camera, anything like that. So that's where the Render Kit comes in. The Render Kit's a plugin that you run inside C4D. And basically what it does is does the meshing process inside of Cinema 4D as you hit render. So you call it in here, and each one of these is a different version of, or is a different call of the plugin, an instance of the plugin. You can actually load multiple particle sequences into one instance of the plugin. The problem I was having with that is that I wanted to be able to shift them in position. So in this case, I used a different instance for each letter. And there you can see you have a lot of the meshing controls that you would get inside of RealFlow normally are now inside C4D. And when you use it, the particles just come in and they look like normal particles inside C4D. There's a really great control that you can control the level of detail. So I'm only seeing 10% of the particles here. And that keeps my viewport pretty tactile and moving along nicely. I mentioned that the particles store all kinds of information. That comes into C4D and allows you to do something really cool, is to use that information in your material or shader building. So as soon as you select one of those channels and tell it to create vertex maps, then you can start to use those in building up your shaders. It's very similar to some things we saw with, I believe, with the Houdini engine yesterday. So basically, in this case, I've called that velocity channel, and I'm going to use it to control the alpha of this texture. And what that means is that you can stack up lots of different textures, and their opacity will be based on the vertex map that came from that channel. It's really cool for doing things like, more fluid that's moving in a more volatile way, looks a little bit more, you can have a different shader on it. And also, we found in using it for motion graphics, you can get some really cool kind of abstract colors just by, or abstract looks, just by pumping different shaders in there. This is a render. So basically, that is the mesh being rendered live in C4D. That's actually a real-time capture off my desktop computer. So that's how long it took for it to generate that mesh. That file is created just for that frame, and then that mesh file is discarded. So we can render these over our render farm. It all works just great. It was a huge time saver. So I'll just run you through the ad one more time, and you can see where some of those, where that was used to effect.
We start.
Oh no, I love this sound.
Addition. An ounce of passion. Then we add a splash of curiosity and a dash of refinement. Squeeze in a few drops of humor and then shake it up with some generosity. Serve in good company with a slice of the unforgettable. Drink it slowly. Martel, full of character.
Okay, so moving on to our next job. We have a long-lasting relationship with the company Adidas, our Adidas. We tend to make a lot of ads like this for them, featuring, featuring their shoes, their football shoes, or boots, they call them. And for years now, we've been doing this kind of thing where we shoot a boot on a turntable with live action. We bring it into After Effects, and we add all these different layers and effects. Here's another one we did. I think these were all part of a series we did last year. So this time, Adidas called us up and said, we want you to do something a little bit different. And we want you to use this guy. You might recognize him. His name is Mesut Özil, and he plays for, I hope I said that right, he plays for the German national team. He also plays in England for a team called Arsenal, which may well explain why we got this job, because he was in London at the time, and they wanted to make the ad with him. I'm going to show you the ad. So that's the ad. This ad was directed by one of our in-house directors, a guy called John Sunter. This is one of his early style frames. And it was a concept that basically took lots of kind of textures and images based, sort of motivated by the design of the boot. And these were kind of sort of emit from Özil as he ran around. So basically he's out there on a pitch playing football, and we're seeing these neat, cool textures come off him, and eventually he kind of transforms into this sort of reptile creature. We knew right away that we were going to face quite a few challenges with this job. One of the biggest ones is how are we going to track all this stuff onto him? How are we going to make it look like it really is stuck onto him when he's running around playing football? We've done this before with people who were hardly moving, and we found that quite tricky. So we were wondering, what happens when he spins around and jumps, that kind of stuff. This got a lot harder when the client rang us up and said, by the way, you're going to have him for 2 hours. So we had a 2-day shoot planned, and we knew that we would need probably most of that time with him, and they were giving us 2 hours. So we panicked. Actually, we didn't panic. We brought in this guy. His name is Joe. He's not a professional footballer. Has watched a few games on TV. But he was very willing for us to stick these tracking markers all over him. And these are just things that you buy at a stationery store. And we covered him with these things. And we wanted to know what would happen when you started running around with these on. How many would you be able to see? How many would disappear? What happens when one leg moves in front of the other? What happens close up? Can we, can we track the ball? Can we track his feet? What about rigid movement versus soft movement? And of course, the big question, what happens when they come in contact with a football? So we ran all these tests, and we figured out kind of a map for how many we needed to have on this guy at all times. And we went into the shoot with this map drawn, and I sat there with the map while my colleague Melanie Kieser stuck these onto Özil, which she enjoyed doing. And we sent Joe home to figure out how to get these stickers off him. So we went into our shoot, and it was a 2-day shoot in Leavesden Studios in London, where they shoot Harry Potter. And this is just a little video showing you some behind the scenes and some of the processes we used.
Jason, good? Thank you. 3, 2, 1, action.
So it turned out Mesut Özil was a really nice guy. He was very compliant. He did everything we asked. And at the end of the shoot, when his people were telling him he needed to leave, he insisted on staying until he got that scissor kick right, which was quite cool. So a little bit about the process of how we did this. I'm going to start with the design. I hope you all don't mind snakes. This is a piece of stock photography that we bought. And basically we used footage like this, or stock imagery like this, to start building up these reptile patterns. So here's another one. And we just took these and started cutting them up and kind of aligning them in positions that looked good mapped onto his body. So these would go onto his legs. And so we started sort of designing stuff based on that, and then working out how these things would look when they were comped onto him. Here's a little example of what that looks fully comped. Now, for most of his movement, this kind of wide shot stuff, we used a system of point tracking and the puppet tool in After Effects. We rigged an expression that linked the puppet tool to our tracking markers and created this kind of soft deformation that worked around his knee and stuff. And that worked really well. But we had a whole slew of shots, so we had to do a bit differently. And I'll explain that now. So this is just a snakeskin texture that we used for his face. There's a little bit of post work on it. This is the Darth Maul phase of the project. And then we stuck it on him like this. Now, if you look carefully, you might see that this wasn't built using standard kind of 2D planar patching. This is actually stuck onto him in 3D. And I'll explain a bit how we did that. So we start with a shot like this one. And so basically we had to figure out how are we going to make all this stuff look like it really is on his skin. So we started with some of the footage we had. We shot at extremely high speed, so sometimes you could have some footage of him where it looked like he wasn't moving at all. And in fact, we had a dolly around him where he was basically standing almost completely still. And I was able to use that in a kind of cool way using a process called photogrammetry. So this is some footage you can see here. And this is just basically, I could treat that as him standing perfectly still. I know his eyes move, but that doesn't really matter. So we take that into an application called PhotoScan. What PhotoScan does is allows you to treat each one of those frames as though it was a camera, and a stills camera, and then assuming that each one of those pictures was actually taken at the exact same moment. So when you look at this series of pictures here, so just loading them into PhotoScan, PhotoScan assumes that those aren't frames from a video sequence, those are still images taken by 70 cameras. And what it can then do is build a point cloud. And it assumes that all those cameras are out there in space. It figures out where they are in relation to each other. That's what all those little blue squares are out there. And it builds this 3D point cloud. And from that, you can generate a 3D mesh. Depending on how good your photographs were and how static your source is, you can get incredibly good meshes out of this. I was talking to Rupert from Man vs. Machine yesterday, and they use this process to generate a lot of their scans of Nike sneakers, Nike trainers. Then we took this into an application called PFTrack. And PFTrack has a process called geometry tracking, which allows you to take a 3D mesh that is an approximation of an object in the scene, stick it on the object you want to track, and then track it. And this isn't 2D tracking, this is 3D tracking. It's actually translating, rotating, scaling this object, trying to make it stick in a way that works in 3D. So we take this information, this translation, rotation, scale, into C4D. And this is just our model that I used. I've sort of cleaned up that base mesh and added some more rough geometry to it. And we prepped it for texturing, which is all this is basically just, it's been unwrapped so that when I apply a texture to it, it's going to apply nicely in a way that we can control. And we export something from C4D called a UV pass. And a UV pass is not actually what you're seeing here. It just looks like that. So that's why I made this, to show you what it would look like. It's just a kind of rainbow-colored image that you can use to tell other software how to apply a texture to an object. So we took this into After Effects, and that's, you can see our UV map on the right-hand side there. And you can see, using the tracking information, we rendered this out of C4D, and I've just shifted it over to the right, but it stays right where it should do. We take this and we use a plugin called UV Remap. It's by Revision Effects. And what this does is it reads that UV map and then warps a texture in order to fit onto that UV map. So in this case, I've built a pre-comp, which is my texture. I need to flip the Y of the UVs. And now just applied it to him. So this is using a pre-comp and sticking it onto him. I've changed it to overlay, and you can see a bit more clearly how it works. And what's so great about this, you can see that it sticks quite well, is that I can animate my texture in After Effects at the same time and see it applied to him as I'm doing it. So if you look at the image on the right, that's the pre-comp that is that texture. I know it looks a bit messy, but it looks fine when it's applied. And as you see over on the right-hand side, I can see it animating there, and I can see what that's doing on the left-hand side. So it gives us a lot of control with the tools that we like to use. To be honest, if I did this again, I'd probably use Nuke, now that I know it can do this kind of thing. But we do like to work in After Effects. It's what all our artists know. So this is actually a really great tool for us. This is a bit of a process showing how we built these up. We also exported a depth map from C4D, which allowed us to use Frischluft in After Effects to give a depth of field to our look. And it looks pretty cool. In fact, our director at one point said, "You've made it into a VFX shot, and it's supposed to be a graphics shot, so you have to make it look less realistic," which I thought was a good thing. So here's just another look at the ad, and you can pick out some other shots of it. So that's what footballers do when they're in the height of their career. This is what they drive after they retire. This is a British car maker called Bentley. And Bentley asked us to make a series of ads for a new car that they're releasing in a couple years' time. And sorry, I just got to find my script. Basically, what they wanted us to do is create an ad for this car, or a series of ads for this car, but not actually show the car. And that sounds easy, but actually it proved to be quite difficult. These two ads I'm going to show you now were directed by one of our in-house directors, a guy called Rupert Cresswell. Okay, so that's number one, and here's number two. So we built those two ads using our sort of go-to software favorites, C4D and After Effects. And there are a couple things in that second ad that you probably didn't notice, but I thought I would talk about anyway. One of the tricky challenges in that one was that we actually had to get a realistic car movement for our car. And even though you barely see it, in order for it to move through the frame as though it's going over the sandy terrain, and for it to be apparent to the kind of emitter effects, the sort of sandy effects that we wanted to create, we needed some genuine movement for that as well. So our animator, Matteo Mancini, built this quite cool control rig for the car using Espresso. So if you haven't used Espresso before, it's a node-based programming world inside of C4D. So a node-based expression system built inside C4D. It's extremely useful for people like us who aren't really interested in writing any code or anything like that, because it's pretty logical, and once you get your head around it, it's quite useful for doing things like this. So over here on the right-hand side, you can see the Espresso rig. And basically what this is all powering is a combination of render controls and also this sort of logical rig that we created for the car. So there you can see these are all the kind of spring effects that give it vibration over terrain. And on the left-hand side are some of the wheel controls. So Matteo set this up in a few hours. And what you get from that is this. It uses C4D's heads-up display, and it's basically just sort of intuitive interface for animating a car. And any one of our animators could pick this up and very quickly get the car moving the way they wanted. And it's got all kinds of neat things built into it. For instance, the wheels automatically turn when the car moves forwards and backwards. So none of that having to figure out how much to rotate a wheel when the car travels a certain direction or anything like that. Here it is from the side view. Another thing he built is this springs rig so that he could dynamically control the amount of vibration that we got off the wheels. So there's springs for the whole chassis of the car and also separate ones for the wheels. Now, one of the things I wanted to point out here is C4D, one of the great things about using it is its user base and the way that the users share information. So in this case, Matteo went online and asked some questions, and a user sent him back this Python script, which he was able to plug into Espresso. And I believe that script actually controls the render controls, so that he could very quickly, using the render controls here in the render manager, change to different lighting setups and texturing setups so that he could quickly see what the car would look like, for instance, with a Fresnel pass, which is one of the ways we would render it, or different, in the various passes we were going to render. He could switch between those automatically. I thought that was pretty cool. Another thing we did, which is also quite subtle, is we used two plugins, X-Particles and Turbulence, to create the sort of sand kicked up behind the car in the desert shots. Now, we've used these plugins quite a bit, and we use X-Particles a lot as a sort of main way of animating particles. Turbulence, less so, and we're still getting to grips with it. But one thing that we noticed is that we're very comfortable in getting X-Particles to go exactly where we want. Turbulence particles, because they're sort of driven by physics, are a little bit more chaotic. And our animator, Patrick Phoenix, discovered a system where you could use X-Particles to become turbulence emitters. So I'll show you what I mean. These particles you see here are flying up from X-Particles, and there's no kind of physics on them or anything like that, and they're going exactly where we want them. Now, each one of those has a 4-frame lifespan, and in fact, becomes an emitter. So each particle that's coming out there now emits new particles in turbulence. I'll show you what that looks like. So you get all this really cool physics from turbulence and the smoke and dust renders with the initial control that we get out of X-Particles. It's something we didn't really know you could do at first, and now ever since we've discovered it, we've been using this technique a lot. Here's a look at what it looks like rendered. Now, at first glance, we thought it looks a little bit repetitive, and Patrick, who made this, said, yeah, I'm going to try to put a little more kind of variation, break up that patterning. But Patrick is also really into cars, and he looked online and he saw several references to cars driving through sand and dirt, and he found that actually that repetition is quite normal. You get that from from a trail, from a tire tread kicking up the same kind of pattern each time. So we stuck with that. Here's just another simulation showing what happens when the car just drives through a lot of particles. And we were really excited about these kind of eddies and vortices we were getting on the edges. They kind of made me think of what you see off the edges of plane wings and that kind of stuff. So we were thrilled with that. Just to give you an idea of how we use these things, this is the shot without the rendered particles in it, but this big white mask around the car, this sort of big white vignette. Its mask, its opacity, is actually controlled by the particle pass. So you can see on the edges, it cuts away where the particles were. And then with the particles in it, it looks a bit like this. Cool, okay. I've got one more project to talk about. Guess what? It's about football. This project, you might actually recognize if you live in Germany, is the Open for ZDF's, sorry if I said that wrong, Champions League coverage. That's its official name. I call it how many plugins can you use before your head explodes. We chucked everything at this. The project was directed by these guys, Steve and Tom. They are directors in our studio, and they call themselves H-Block. And they have made this very cool behind-the-scenes film. I will explain before I show it to you that it includes a lot of material that is not from MPC. It's just part of mood boards and referencing. But I think it gives you a good idea of how they kind of sold the project and then what they did with it. Okay, so that's a pretty good breakdown of how they made this. They're Tom and Steve again. I think this project is a really good example of what makes motion design different from a lot of other departments in our company. And in fact, I think what makes motion design a very different business from a lot of other parts of visual effects. Tom and Steve are directors, but they're also designers, animators, and 3D artists. So everything you just saw there, all the design, editing, animation, particle simulation, lighting, rendering, compositing, was done by Tom and Steve. They are beyond ninjas. One of the big effects we really wanted to achieve was this sense that the players are kind of made up of this sort of cosmic dust and gas. And the way we originally expected to do this was to get footage of the players and do a process called roto-anim, where we build 3D models that are very similar to the players, and then we track and animate them in a way that moves exactly as the players have. And that allows us to use these as a source of all kinds of movement. So we can emit particles off their body, we can involve them in some kind of physics simulation, all that kind of stuff. This turned out to be impossible because on a project like this, there's constant arguing over who's going to be in the thing and when. So, is Ronaldo going to be in it? We were making this just during the World Cup, so is Suarez going to be in it? No, he bit somebody, so we can't have him in it. I'm going to take him out. And that's kind of part of our work. Not biting people, but trying to figure out how to deal with this constantly changing client needs. And of course, our client is the boss here. So in the end, Tom and Steve compromised and went with something like this. And what you're seeing here is a flat plane in C4D with a material using the video clip of the player. So we rotoscope the player out so we get a nice clean silhouette and just get the player, none of the background. Then we use the roto, the alpha channel from that texture as a control over an emitter. So particles are only being emitted where that alpha channel is allowing them. And then Xparticles takes the color from the video clip and uses that to source the color for the particles as they're emitted. Then we just bring in all kinds of turbulence effects and that kind of stuff. We had a really good time playing with Xparticles on this. And I said we used a lot of plugins. We chucked Krakatoa in there as well. Krakatoa is really good at replicating particles and handling huge particle simulations. It also creates these really beautiful volumetric effects like you can see in there. And those are great for creating sort of nebulae and that sort of thing. We also used our combo of turbulence and Xparticles again. So I think in this case it might be the other way around. The actual emitters here are turbulence emitters, which is what's giving us that nice physics, but the particles are Xparticles, which allows us to explicitly control the way they're rendered, their texture, and that kind of stuff. We use Cinema 4D sculpting tools to create a lot of this 3D geometry you see in there. So a lot of the asteroids and rocks you see started out as sphere or square primitives, cube primitives, and we just subdivided them and sculpted a lot of inner detail into them. On one part of this, we didn't really get the results we wanted using the sculpting tools, so we popped into ZBrush. And this is the Champions League ball, so this is obviously something that's going to feature a lot in the ad. And we decided that we would build, or Tom and Steve would build the base mesh in ZBrush, and then use ZBrush to kind of add a lot of this sort of rocky terrain, kind of aged planet look to it. Then we rendered this using V-Ray, a couple passes, and then included a particle simulation in there. Now, of course, we did most of our work in C4D. That's where all the 3D was done, but then we wanted to composite this in After Effects. So we used Cineware, which is a way of communicating between After Effects and Cinema 4D, to bring all our cameras and 3D locators into After Effects so we can control the scene in there. And we did that mainly because we wanted to bring in all this cool 2D footage that Tom and Steve had shot in a tank shoot. So they went into a studio in London and squeezed all these different chemicals and stuff into a tank of warm water, and you get all these really cool looks like this. They used something called Jay's fluid, or Jay's solution, which I've never heard of, but apparently it's a pipe cleaner, and gets you a lot of these really cool looks in there. So that's our tank shoot. Those are all the different elements, and here's how it came together. So that is the ZDF Champions League Open. Tom and Steve finished this at 4 a.m. on the day it was meant to deliver, after many cans of Coke, and I think slept for about a week afterwards. And that's all I'm going to show you today. Thank you for watching, and please let me know if you have any questions. Does anyone want to ask anything? Yes? On ZDF? It's hard to calculate because they spent so much time getting new bits of footage in and re-editing. I think that actually took the majority of the time of the project. So I think they spent about 4 months on it, the two of them, but at least 2 months of that was just getting new bits of footage in, rotoscoping them, trying them in the edit, and then hearing back from the client. And the client, you know, it was essential to the client they get the right players at the right time in there. And you know, you're trying to predict what's going to happen when the Champions League begins. The World Cup was looming. So that was kind of the killer. They did all that kind of look dev testing as well at the same time. So they had kind of a lot of pre-production time, as it were. So I would say about 4 months for the two of them. Anyone else? Yes? Oh, no. Sorry, we're going to get you a microphone here.
Hello.
Hello.
I was just wondering, as each one of you, I mean, you have to need a lot of different skills to work in this kind of environment with this kind of jobs. I'm just wondering if some of you have maybe main skills or how you subdivide every task every time you have a new project coming in.
Yeah. We all have things we're better at. Some of us are better at 3D, some are better at 2D. Some of us are really great illustrators. Some are great doing kind of particle simulations. So when we can, we try to put the right people on the right parts of jobs. But we are a studio, and we're usually doing kind of 3 or 4 jobs at once with very sometimes chaotic schedules. So sometimes we can't put the right people on the jobs we want. And it's really a juggling act of figuring out who's available when and who's the right person for the job. The ZDF one I showed you just there, it's kind of unusual because it had the same 2 guys on it start to finish. But I think that was because when we did it, Tom and Steve had such ownership of it because they won it and they wanted to do it in a specific way. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, sure.
Cool.
Hello, I was just wondering if you use any asset management tracking system. I mean, motion graphics is one of those things can get very rapid, quick pace changes, versions, different shots. How do you keep track of everything?
Actually, I've been asked this before. We don't do any system, we don't use any software. We do have a very explicit file structure that we use and file naming. And when someone starts in a studio, we try to kind of get them on board with that and doing it right. There's a very funny video on Motionographer called Get Your Shit Together, in which 2 guys are in a studio and one of them just berates the other guy for his, naming things like version 5 final re-edit 2 version final X. So basically it's down to file naming and file structures.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Yes.
I'm wondering.
That's okay, I can hear you.
I'm wondering, like before the production start, how about the pitching idea kind of thing going on?
Yeah, we pitch for pretty much every job we do, depending on how many other people are pitching on it, how many other studios. We might be involved in a kind of a staged process where they kind of choose maybe 2 or 3 of the pitches, and then they start paying for a little bit more work to be done on pitches. But generally, we do them unpaid. It depends. Sometimes we've had big kind of brainstorming sessions. We tried that on the Adidas job, and actually we realized it was better to have one director kind of pushing his vision through. We do still kind of talk to each other about the pitches that we're working on. MPC has a sort of an agency within the company called MPC Creative. So actually they are contacted by outside clients, and the executive producers from MPC Creative will decide who is the right person to pitch for that job. And then they spend anything between a couple of days to a few weeks. We pitched something recently we spent a couple of months on, putting together treatments, tests, and all that kind of stuff. It's yeah, pitching can be a kind of a scary thing because you can often pitch for a lot of jobs and not win any. But it is a very important part of our studio. Sure. Okay. I don't see any more hands up, so thank you very much for coming, everybody. Be around if you want to talk. Thanks.